All right. Well, I think we're just a little bit past the top of the hour, so we got a lot to cover. So we'll go ahead and kick things off. Welcome and thank you for joining us today to take a look at the MFRPS change proposals that the MFRPA received this year. My name is Pat Kennelly. I'm a program director with the Association of Food and Drug Officials.
Okay, why can't I hear him?
I don't know. Am I not on? I should be on.
I can hear you, Pat.
I can hear you, Pat.
We can hear you.
Okay. So if you cannot hear me, you may want to check your speakers. Your speakers may not be turned on. You need to log back in again if you're having some issues, but others are able to hear me. Amy, if you could put that note in chat for folks that can't hear me, because I just told everybody, but they couldn't hear me tell them, so maybe they'll need to see it in chat.
Yep, I will.
Thank you. All right. And so again, my name is Pat Kennelly. I'm program director with the Association of Food and Drug Officials, AFDO. Today, Steve Stitch, a fellow program director with AFDO, we're going to present the proposals to you and go through this. We are recording this session, so I just want to make sure everyone is aware we are recording it. So Amy, if you could go ahead and turn on the recording. This way, if you're not able to see the entire presentation, you can go back and see it later. And for folks that missed it, they'll be able to tag on to it and see it as well. I'd like to start off by thanking the MFRPS Alliance Board. They provided a lot of guidance and oversight to the process this year to make sure things went smoothly and that we were able to move through the processes very nicely. Also to FDA, to DSI and audit staff, they provided a lot of expertise to the work groups and the review of the proposals, making sure that everyone was educated on the standards and on the issues so that we could make good quality decisions within the work groups. So, and of course, last but not least, can't go without mentioning our work group members. We had just a great group of folks that donated their time and expertise this year to the process and staffed the work groups and reviewed the proposals and helped us work on some of the language with those proposals and decide whether or not they should go forward. So we really appreciate all of everybody's help in that. So just a little bit about our process that we're going to utilize today. We're going to provide an overview of each of the proposals received. We'll go ahead and do them in order by the work group, and we'll go through that in a minute so you understand what order we're going to do. So we will jump around a little bit, but within each standard, we'll go through all those proposals within the standard at one time and then move on to the next standard. We do have some that cross over a couple of different standards, and that'll be obvious by the PowerPoint slide. You'll see which standards that they're affecting it. So we'll go ahead and cover that in the PowerPoint slide, provide a summary and give you an overview of the change and the work group recommendation. Then we'll go ahead and pull up the actual marked up language, which will be in red line. So you'll see red italics for new words or language being put in, and it'll be red strike through for anything that we are proposing to remove. So we'll go through each of those. There may be a couple of proposals that are just very simple and straightforward, and we may group a couple of like ones together during this. So normally we'll go through, do the PowerPoint. I'll switch over to the Word document, which has the red strike through, and then we'll pause and open it up for any comments. We'll ask that you can drop your comments in chat so that we can capture those. If you'd like to say something or ask something, just please put in chat that you have a question. We'll recognize you, then you can unmute your mic and go ahead and ask your question or make your statement, and then we'll move on to the next. So we've got 22 proposals in all to get through, so we've got quite a few to get through. Some are very simple and easy, others a little bit more complex, and we'll have to spend a little bit of time on them. So we will try to be, somewhat cognizant of time. If we don't have enough time and we run out of time, then we'll have to schedule a follow-up session to continue going through the documents. So at this point, we would ask everybody to go ahead and mute their lines, just so that we don't have any of that background noise, the dogs barking, or the leaf blowers blowing, and all that kind of good stuff. And then when it's time for comments, we'll ask you to unmute your line so that you can provide your comment. And for those that may be calling in on the phone versus using their computer audio, remember you may get double muted, so just be prepared to undouble mute yourself from your phone and from the computer. So let's get things kicked off. So this year we received, I think, a total of 18 proposals from the membership. We opened up the process on July 1st and received submissions all the way through September 1st. And of course, we allow a late proposal submission process So we actually received proposals all the way up to October 15th per the provisions of our change proposal process. And again, 18 proposals were sent to the work groups for evaluation. So they were assigned to work groups based on the standard number that they were associated with. So, work group 1 covered standards 1, 2, 8, and 9. Work group 2 covered 3, 4, and 6. Work group 3 covered 5 and 7. And work group 4 covered standard 10. I should note that there were no proposals submitted related to standard 10 this year. So work group 4, while we did have some volunteers, we appreciate you volunteering. We do not have any proposals to send to work group 4, so they didn't have any work. I should also mention that we have, in addition to the 18 received, the board had stood up a FSMA work group. The FSMA work group was charged specifically with looking at sanitary transportation and intentional adulteration rules and how they may impact the standards. So there are 4 proposals at the end that we'll cover from the FSMA work group that were submitted by them. So that, again, we'll cover those at the end. We'll go through the first 18 submitted by the membership first, and then grab those last 4 at the end of the session here. So we're going to go ahead and jump in here with work group 1 proposals. And again, like to recognize our work group members that really did a lot of heavy lifting and provided their time and their expertise to the process. So thank you again for all the assistance you provided in this process and making this a successful process this year. All right, so let's kick things off with proposal number 2. This is related to definition for evaluation. So it recommended updating the definition so that the terminology and the definition of evaluation was more consistent with the language in standard 2, changing the word GMP to basic and adding advanced with specialized in parentheses as the terms apply to both basic and advanced inspection training. This is going to be more consistent with the standards. The work group reviewed the existing evaluation definition and relevant sections of Standard 2 during the process. They noted that Standard 2 uses both advanced inspection and specialized inspection terminology somewhat interchangeably. However, everyone agreed that the use of basic and advanced in the evaluation definition was probably the most consistent with the terminology of Standard 2 and would provide additional clarity. They recommended keeping that word specialty but putting it as a parenthetical behind advanced, just so that, again, it helps connect that language further to the standard, since those 2 terms are used somewhat interchangeably in the standard. So let me go ahead and pull this up. Everyone should be able to see a Word document now with the actual modified changes. If you can't see that, someone give me a shout and let me know. So as you can see here, struck the word GMP and replaced it with basic, and added the word advanced in front of the existing word specialized and just put that in a parenthetical, and then just added the inspection type, which again is language in the standard, and then addressed that same comment in the bullet. So that's the proposal for 20002 to update the definition of evaluation to be more consistent with the language used in standard 2. So we'll go ahead and open this up for any comments or questions. If you could drop your name in chat or drop your comment in chat, we will recognize you and you can unmute and ask your question or make your comment, or you can just provide a written comment in chat if that's all you'd like to do. All right, not seeing any comments here. I'm gonna go ahead and move on. If we do get one coming in because you're typing, we'll come back to this. So don't want to go too fast, but don't want to go too slow either. So we'll try and find that nice little mix of time there. So let's go ahead and move on to the next proposed change here, and this is for 20009 that was submitted, recommending the addition of Foreign Supplier Verification Program regulation to section to Appendix 1.2. So there is an existing reference for 21 CFR Part 1, which is where those regulations exist, but the subpart does not actually is not listed there. So they're recommending adding this, to that. So that's the modification that's going to be made there. I'm also going to go ahead and cover the next slide because we'll be able to look at Appendix 1.2 and see both changes here very quickly because they're both the same. Same section, 21 CFR Part 1 in Appendix 1.2. Right now, it just lists the subpart. So there's a recommendation to add the word sanitary transportation in front of it, just to make sure that folks understand what that subpart is related to. So it'll, that subpart O that's there is the sanitary transportation. We're just going to add those words in front of it. So for those two, we'll go ahead and pull up our mocked up language here so you can see. So again, this is the first one related to FSVP. This is your Appendix 1.2 where we catalog all of our authorities against the FDA authorities. So that change here for 21 CFR 1 is going to be adding in this one additional subpart for foreign supplier verification, subpart L, into Part 1. And I'll scroll down so you can see the proposal to do the next one. And these all stand on their own because they could be voted up or voted down. So you'll see them all as individual proposals. Obviously, these will be combined depending on the voting that ultimately occurs. So for the sanitary transportation, again, same subpart. Subpart O, as you see, was already provided there. So all we're doing is adding in this descriptor right in front of it so that you can quickly and easily identify that subpart O is related to sanitary transportation. So no significant impact for either adding in foreign supplier verification or the sanitary transportation. So I'll go ahead and pause there for a minute and go ahead and open it up for any comments or questions. If you could drop your comments or questions in chat. If you'd like to be recognized, just put that in chat that you've got a comment or question. We'll recognize you. You can unmute and offer your comment. All right, not seeing any comments. Again, if you're still typing, no worries, we'll come back. I just don't want to wait too long here as we have everybody here on the line. So we'll go ahead and move on to our next proposal here, still related to Standard 1. This is 20-011. Proposal recommended for modifying the format of Appendix 1.2. So it's a little bit more substantive of a change, but the proposal is to make the modification to this table because it is a little bit confusing, but to match it to the format for the Appendix 1.2 that's actually being developed for the proposed FDA Egg Program Standards. So I think they've taken a lot of really good information, both from what they've learned from the feed standards, what they've learned from MFRPA, and they've applied that to a new table, and I'll share that with you in a moment, let you kick the tires on that. But the new table eliminates a number of columns and alternatively creates a drop down for selection of either equivalent effect, or not equivalent, or no authority. That's no authority is a new one that's been added. The column for revision date of federal law or regulation and partial or full equivalency and equivalent in effect review date have been eliminated. So it's actually streamlining the form a little bit. The new category for no authority, again, has been incorporated into the drop-down. So then there's just some other conforming changes with the instructions associated with that. So the work group actually really liked this change and thought that it really streamlined, that modification. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Get through the appendix. Sorry, that's still the last one. Got to scroll ahead. All right, so you can see a lot of new instructions, and we'll come back up to the instructions here, but very much streamlined. So I go back up to the last form here. You can see all of the columns that we have for data incorporated into state law, partial or full, review date not equivalent, all this good stuff. So now it's much more streamlined, and your equivalency status is actually a drop down. So you get a drop down that allows you to choose an item of equivalent effect, not equivalent, or no authority. So again, creates one column for an easy selection. You put your state citation, your data incorporated into state law. You no longer have to document the date of the federal statute or regulation modification. So it's a much more streamlined form that, like I said, the work group really liked in terms of being easier to complete. All of this data that is required here will be able to be copied over from your existing form. You'll be able to cut and paste it over from your existing fields. because all these section numbers are the same, so you'll be able to copy it and paste it into your individual cells or rows. You don't have to redo the work again, unless it's time for you to reevaluate that standard, and then you just select your item here. So again, the directions, the changes here, just telling you when to select no authority, and for statutes or regulations where where you do have authority, it just, again, giving you those instructions on how to complete the form here in the top portion of this. So I'll go ahead and scroll down through the form so you can see that it's fairly straightforward, and this change has been carried through the entire form. So I'll stop there and go ahead and open it up for any comments or questions from our audience. Again, use your chat function to ask to be recognized, or go ahead and drop your comment or question in chat. Okay, in an effort to get some chat going, what do you all think of this? Do you like the new format? Make it a little bit more streamlined? Does it seem less complicated? Anyone have any thoughts on that? You want to drop in chat for everybody? Got an I love it. Thank you, Zach. Good change. Thank you, Shadow. All right. Like it. Definitely helpful. All right. Good. So we got some positive feedback on that. Excellent. Yeah, I think the work group thought this was a good change as well. It really streamlined it, made it a lot simpler, much more straightforward, a lot less confusing than our own form. Let's see. Kimberly's asking, with the proposed changes, with dates on the document, would there be any problem regarding whether the agency is adopting the most recent version? And you're talking about the dates to the federal, I'm assuming, Kimberly, where we had previously revision date for federal law or regulation. Yes, to the federal, she clarifies. So yeah, I mean, you're still going to have to use that most current version of the federal rule or regulation. You're just not required to document it anymore. So it really shouldn't change anything. I mean, if there's a change in the federal regulation, and I think the board had discussed with DSI staff about getting, on an annual basis, a list of any modifications to these rules or to these statutory sections, so that we knew we would have to go back and effectively check those again against the amended regulation or the amended statute. For the most part, I think we get pretty good publication of them because we're all tied into the process. But yeah, if anyone from DSI staff on, you can correct me if I'm wrong there, but I think that we would tend to call those out for folks to make sure they're aware of them. At least that's our intent.
Hey, Pat, this is Guy. Yeah, that is our intention, is to update the job aid for that standard 1, which would automatically take you to the most current federal law as of that time. So that's on our docket of things to update, to hopefully be coinciding with the issuance of the 2022 standards for sure.
So you're talking about these hyperlinks here where I have my cursor now that are on that left column. You update these for the statutes and the regulations each year, so that as we go in to use the appendices form that's available, that they'll be able to take you to the most current version. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yep.
All right. Thank you for the clarification. All right. Any other comments or questions on this one? U.S. code number. So Kathy's asking about we got the FD&C Act numbers here. For searchability, of course, if you click on these links, that does take you directly to the code section, but Kathy was asking about putting a U.S. code number on each of these. So that's certainly a consideration. We don't do it right now as part of this because it wasn't part of the proposal. But yeah, we can certainly look at that down the road. Comment. All right, anything else on this one? And we did capture that comment on the USC code. All right, well, let's go ahead and go back to our presentation here, and we'll go on to, I'm moving too fast here. Where am I at? Get off the scroller wheel and get back to where I'm supposed to be here. All right. Sorry if I made you dizzy. So here we go. We're on proposal 12. This one recommended adding a new section 1.3.3 to Standard 1, which will require the states identify their public records statutory citation on Appendix 1.2. Appendix 1.2 is modified to provide an area at the bottom of the appendix for states to add their public records law statutory citations, adjacent to the section where states can document other state food safety laws used to address regulatory responsibility. So that's an existing section. It'll be right next to that, and I'll show you that in just a minute. We reviewed the proposal at the work group. The work group did raise some concerns over the original proposed language, which would have required states to have public records laws. Most states likely have public records laws, but it was pointed out that the food safety programs rarely have any input or control over them. The work group recommended modifying the language to requiring documentation of the state's public record laws, since that would be more consistent with the intent of Standard 1, Appendix 1.2, where we're just cataloging our authority. Additionally, the proposed language in 1.2 was also modified by the work group to provide for the documentation of the state statutory regulatory sections related to public records laws. So again, that conforming change was made. So the work group recommendation does include that modified language. We'll go ahead and swap over that here. Scroll on up. All right, so the change you can see here, 1.3.3, state program documents current state laws that relate to public records requests, such as sunshine laws. They're called sunshine laws in some states. Other states call them freedom of information, public records. They're called a variety of things. So we just tried to make sure folks understood what we were talking about. And so the new section added in here to the state laws and regulations section is state programs document state laws that relate to public records requests, such as sunshine laws. State laws and regulations regarding information sharing laws are listed below. So it's just a place for you to list your statutory citation sections, just as you did here for the existing section where we listed other laws and regulations used to address responsibilities outside of FDA jurisdiction. Okay, so that's the proposed change to that one. So I'll stop there. And anyone have a comment or suggestion or would like to be recognized, go ahead and drop that into chat. We'll recognize you. All right, so we do have a comment coming in from Kim. While there are statutes regarding public records, there are often at a minimum, oh, hold on, I'm scrolling too fast here. Often at a minimum, state or agency procedures will be required to document everything relating. This is only asking right now to document law or regulation, not your policies or procedures. Kathy asked, can you add FOIA alongside sunshine law? So that's just a language thing there. Thanks for that, Kathy. And then Steve suggests changing the first change in this to be changed to public records request. So I think you were talking about the heading at the top here, Steve. Is that correct? In Standard 3 where it said sunshine law? State sunshine laws, you're recommending changing that 1.3.3?
Yes.
All right, thank you, sir. Yeah, the title there was a carryover from the original language that was submitted as a proposal. All right, so I got both of those comments, public records law and FOIA. All right, any other? All right, Mark Jenkinson liked Steve Morris's public records request language as well, as does Shadow and Ivana. All right, so we've got a good group of folks that like that. So we made that note. It's a fairly straightforward change, so we can take that back to the work group and tweak that. All right, any other comments on this one? Again, we're just asking to document it. You no longer have to have it or no longer have to have certain elements of something required in the statute. You're just putting your statutory and regulatory citations here. All right, well, let's go ahead and take a look at our next one here. Our next one, Proposal 13, a little bit beefier here. We've got some changes potentially to Standard 2, 3, 4, and 8. So what this proposal does is recommend removing some of the guidance-related appendices from the standards and redeveloping them as standalone guidance documents outside the standards. The impacted appendices include Appendix 2.4, which is your training curriculum example. It's just got the list of different training courses that you might put on your training curriculum. Appendix 3.2, which is your risk classification criteria. Appendix 4.5A, which is guidance for completing the contract audit form. And Appendix 8.2, calculation for determining required number of inspectors, as well as a 0.3 on your inspection equipment. So references to these appendices in the impacted standards were either removed or updated accordingly. The requirement for documentation of the number of inspection staff and required equipment in Standard 8 would still exist. You just wouldn't have to have a specific format to put it in that's laid out in 8.2 or 8.3. And as it stood, you were always able to have something similar as long as it had the required information. So the work groups discussion the proposal. They like the idea of being able to update job aids outside the standards. And that's really what this was about. You can only update the standards once every 3 years, and you have to go through a very formalized process, which ultimately requires FDA to post them in the Federal Register for formal comments and everything. So rather than do that, if you move them outside the standard and they just become guidance documents, they can be a little bit more nimble and can be updated. So if OTED adds a new course, Appendix 2.4 as an equivalent outside document that you could still utilize if it's outside the standards could be updated on a ad hoc basis as new courses are added. As the contract audit form changes, you can update instructions on that as well. It just gives you a lot more, or gives FDA a lot more flexibility to update some of these guidance documents in real time rather than having to wait once every 3 years, because it does become pretty burdensome. And Kim comments, this is just a change to be able to separate the guidance docs from the standards to be able to take them outside of the administrative burden of FDA. And Kim, yes, you are absolutely correct. That is taking it outside that OMB process and making it much more easy to update the guidance documents on an ad hoc basis. You could update them once a year, multiple times if need be, as things change. Risk assessments, and determination of high risk, non-high risk is kind of an evolving thing as well. So that would allow that Appendix 3.2 risk classification to be updated, on an ongoing basis to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the language here and share that with you and see what that'll look like. So we'll scroll through a number of standards, and I tried to abbreviate these to not spend too much time, but you'll see we just struck the reference to Appendix 2.4 in Standard 2. It would still exist outside, but it doesn't exist as an appendix. We don't reference it anymore. Now here, instead of Appendix 3.2, which is your risk classification criteria, it would just reference the Standard 3 job aid. A little bit of updated here on the language. We add in conducts and documents a calculation for determining the required number of inspectors. And we got rid of the on Appendix 8.2 or equivalent form. So again, and then we got rid of the using Appendix 8.3 or equivalent form, just that you're documenting these things. So again, updating your required documentation, you still got to document it, you still have to have a list of equipment required for inspections, but we're not referencing the specific forms anymore. And then we're just removing these appendices in their entirety from the standard. So I'll stop there and open it up for any comments. Anyone like to be recognized to ask a question? All right, not seeing any comments. Oh, here we got one in. I like the idea of separating them out. All right, thanks, Kimberly. Okay, well, let's go ahead and move on to the next one. If someone does come up with something, we can come back and recognize that. All right, 20016. This one is related to Standard 8, and I'm going to go ahead and put both this one and the next proposal together. Proposal recommended adding a true Standard 8 self-assessment form as the new Appendix 8.1 and renumbering the other appendices as appropriate. This is something that we recognized, I think, during the last cycle. There was a couple of standards that didn't have true self-assessments. I think it was Standard 1 that one was added in for. So this again would create an actual self-assessment to take you through each of the elements required in Standard 8. Work group discussed the merits of having a self-assessment for Standard 8 for consistency with the other standards. and felt that having it would assist programs in ensuring that they meet each element of the standard or identify which elements need additional work and need to be incorporated into their strategic improvement plan. The work group was concerned with one of the proposed elements, specifically staff to inspect food plants in its inventory at a frequency based on plants' risk classification and necessary inspection. This was called out separately on the appendix. The group felt this element was unnecessary on the self-assessment as it's determined by staffing calculation required by 8.3.2. So they removed that provision because it is rolled up in the larger requirement that you evaluate your staffing and workload. The work group felt that, again, it didn't need to be called out separately. So they are recommending approval of this one. And let's go ahead and just take a quick look at the next one as well, because they're very similar in thought process here. Same thing with Standard 9, no true self-assessment appendix in Standard 9 currently. So the proposal was to add an Appendix 9.1 and then renumber the existing 9.1 to 9.2. This creates that self-assessment form. Again, for consistency with the standards, they felt it was a good idea, and it would help ensure that those programs meet the elements of the standard or identify which elements need additional work and need to be incorporated into strategic improvement plans. So let's go ahead and take a look at the language here. All right, so for Standard 8, we are just changing the existing language. The self-assessment is what that one was called originally, so it's just being changed to resource summary report. Updated the appendix number from 8.1 to 8.2, updated our staffing one from 2 to 3, and then updated equipment from 3 to 4. Again, depending on the prior proposal, some of these might be removed or changed. Again, these ones, we prepare them to stand on their own because they have to be voted on individually. We don't roll them all up. But here's your Appendix 8.1 self-assessment worksheet, and all it does is it literally just takes you back with a question to each of the required elements of the standard. So it's just yes or no, and just like all the other ones, and if no, you explain why. So it goes through program assessment that assesses staff, funding, and equipment. You document it on a 8.2 or similar form, calculate the number of inspectors required based on risk inventory, document the results, and then do the same for equipment. You establish, maintain a list of equipment, document the list. So that's the requirement there. I'll take a quick look at this one now. So all we're redoing on the existing 8.1 is just renaming it to 8.2 and calling it resource summary report now. And for this one, it becomes 8.2A. Same here, just renumbering 8.2 to 8.3 and 8.3 to 8.4, no changes to the documents. And Standard 9, pretty much the same thing, just a renumbering of the existing 9.1 to 9.2, updating some of the language in terms of what they're called, and adding in that self-assessment worksheet, so the new one there. And then this one just takes you again through those elements of the standards. It just, did the program do assessment within the first year, use assessment worksheets associated with each of the standards, use the results to complete an Appendix 9.2. That's the new 9.2. Have a written document control procedure, demonstrating that documents are current and fit for use. Again, these are the elements required in the standards. And then taking it through documents reviewed for accuracy, approved for release, distributed, retained, for 3 years or based on your record retention. And then your strategic improvement plan section, individual elements, improvements needed, and project completion dates for each task, along with personnel responsible and date completed. And the last piece here, of course, related to reviewing and updating that self-assessment plan at least annually, participating in FDA self-assessment. So all those requirements there. So let me go over the chat. I saw some chats rolling in here, so make sure I get them all here. So these would require completing 2 more forms, Kimberly asked, and the answer is yes, it would require completing these 2 new forms. You check the box predominantly if you have all these. As most states are in full conformance, they'd be marking yes on all these and signing at the bottom. But again, it takes you through that each element just to make sure you have that. So it is, in terms of additional workload, it is relatively minor. They're both relatively short forms, And the only additional language that you would be, having to put in is if you don't meet something, you'd have to put a short explanation. But that's a year one thing. After that, it's probably minimal updating after that when you do your self-assessments. Let's see, Mark offers, like proposed changes, new self-assessments are more consistent with the rest of the standards, including 1.1, which we made a few years ago. That's correct, Mark. We did do the same thing with Appendix 1.1, I believe, during the last cycle. So, any other comments on these two changes? I second does not meet. Okay, I guess I missed something here. Fails is an awfully strong word. Could the form just say does not meet? Well, the element is not met. Okay, you're gonna have to help me out here. Where does it say fail, or it's gonna take me a year?
Hey, Pat, it's actually Kimberly Stryker. She said this is minor, but fails is an awfully strong word. Could the form say it?
I got that. I'm trying to figure out where it says that. I'm trying to find the word fails without doing a word search while we're on the call.
Hey, Pat, it's down there in
I just saw
9.3.
it, Pat.
9.3?
Yeah. On that form.
On the form.
It's on the appendix.
9.3.3?
Uh-huh.
Oh, there we go. All right. Let me highlight that. Good note. So fails versus, what was the word that Kim proposed? Does not meet. Okay, comment, got that caught. All right. Does not meet or fails to meet. Okay, does not. Excellent. A couple other comments that they agree with that. All right, great. We got that one. Let's see. I need to. There was a question on the previous ones. Just want to stop there and make sure we address that. Justin, still got people popping in, so it moves my form every time it pops in. Hold on. We would still need to document the training during audits as job aids. Would these forms be updated along with the standards? Okay, so Justin, I'm going to ask you to explain what you were asking. This is for the prior ones. Let me back up here.
So my question is if we turn those from appendices into job aids when we change standards or when the standards change, are those job aids going to be updated, or is that going to now fall to program coordinators to make sure that however we're tracking our training with our staff, that they meet the standards? I don't mind if they're changed from appendices to job aids. I just want to make sure that when changes to the standards occur, the job aids are also modified to reflect what's required.
Yeah, so yeah, and again, most of these job aids, they're guidance, and so if they're, and it's one thing, and by taking them out of the standards, they definitely become guidance, which was their intent in the standards. But when they're in the standard, they can, of course, if it's in there, you can be audited against. I think the intent is that it would be moved out. So again, if they updated Appendix 2.4 to add additional training courses, as a reference, and it was a new category, then yeah, we would be adding new categories to the training documentation form. I think it's 2.3, so that you'd be able to track those, but of course that would only happen at the every 3-year mark when that was being done. But for the most part, it would probably live within the existing categories that are there, so you'd still be able to capture and do those. But again, you come up with your training plan for your staff based on your statutory authorities, and then that's what you're going to document the training to. So there may be some courses that are on 2.4 even as a guidance document. They're just not relevant to your program because you don't have jurisdiction to inspect those types of facilities. We'll say dietary supplements. Not everybody has authority to do that. So you're not going to be requiring your staff to go to dietary supplement training because you have no jurisdiction to do those. So that's not going to be required for you to document. But anything that's on your training plan, you have to document the training for, and that's what you'd be audited to. Did that answer the question? Okay, looks like it does. All right, and going back on our last one, I did capture the fails to meet or does not meet language for the 9.3.3. I made a note of that, so we'll take that back to the work group. Thank you for that, Kim, and for those that commented on that. All right, so any other comments or questions related to adding self-assessment forms for Appendix or Standard 8 or Standard 9? All right, so we'll go ahead and move on to our next proposal here. All right, proposal 20003. This one's related to Standard 9 and Standard 6, and it recommends that the requirement to communicate policy and guidance, which exists within Standard 6, be eliminated since it already is covered in Standard 9. The document control provisions set forth in Standard 9, specifically 9.3.2.1.1.3, that's a mouthful, requires that documents be distributed and used where the activities related to the documents performed. This would include distribution of the written compliance and enforcement program and compliance policy and guidance documents that are also required under Standard 6, Section 6.3.1.5. The document control provisions were updated in 2016 version of the standards. However, 6.3.1.5 was not removed or updated at that time. That section requires the same action as a more comprehensive requirement in Standard 9 and therefore is no longer needed. The work group agreed that the proposed recommendation, including the addition of the words applicable staff to the Standard 9 section, would add more clarity. So they are recommending that change. So let's go ahead and pull that up and see what that looks like here. So our Standard 9 self-assessment. So let me go on here. All right, so in Standard 6, we would just be striking out the 6.3.1.5. Here's the existing Standard 9 section with the addition of the words applicable staff to it. So documents are distributed to applicable staff and used at the location where the prescribed activity is performed. And so again, this is now inclusive of the standalone requirement that still existed in Standard 6 to communicate policy and guidance to managerial and non-managerial staff. That's the modification there. So I'll stop there and ask for any comments or questions. Okay, Kim is suggesting applicable staff as appropriate. This is 23. Any other comments? Okay. Good comment, Kim. I got that one documented. We'll take that back to the work group. Okay, not seeing any other comments. We'll go ahead and move on to our next proposal here. That's 20017. This proposal recommended updating Standard 9 to require states to have a procedure for sharing data with agencies that it shares jurisdiction with and utilize data that is received from those agencies. The work group felt that this proposed change was appropriate given the efforts to establish an integrated food safety system to work towards mutual reliance. While we talk about sharing information between agencies, there's currently no section in the standards that speaks to the procedures to actually communicate and share routine data. The work group made some modifications to the proposed language to simplify the terminology being used. The original proposed language was a state program has a written procedure to communicate, collaborate, exchange, and accept data when applicable with manufactured food regulatory programs with whose it shares authority. There's also some debate over whether to use the word authority or jurisdiction. The work group just landed on jurisdiction and felt that was more appropriate. So the language was modified, and I'll show you that here in just a minute. The state program has a written procedure to share regulatory information and utilize data received when applicable with manufactured food regulatory programs with whom it shares jurisdiction. So again, very much more simplified. So they are recommending with the modified language that that move forward. So let me go ahead and pull that up for you and let you take a look at it. So again, we are adding that into standard 9 here as a 9.3.6. And you can see the language there. State program has a written procedure or procedures to share regulatory information and utilize data received when applicable with manufactured food regulatory programs with whom it shares jurisdiction. So I'll stop there and open it up for any comments. All right. What does it mean to written procedure to utilize data received? Kim is asking. I think the intent of that is that that you actually do something with data when you receive it. So if you received a consumer complaint, from your allied agency, that you would actually at least evaluate it and decide whether it needed to be follow up on, and not just throw it into a file cabinet. It's great if we share data, but if no one ever does anything with it, then it kind of becomes useless to even go through the process of sharing the data and utilizing the data. Doesn't mean you have to do anything with it. It just means that, there's an intent that, you would actually be able to utilize the data. You'd evaluate whether it's appropriate to do something or not, and not just automatically, dump it into a file cabinet and say, oh, good, we got another piece of paper. Shadow recommends removing the S's from procedures, so it reads the state program has a written procedure to share. Okay, thanks for that, Shadow. All right, make sure I'm not moving too fast here. Lots of comments coming in, so I'm going to try to hold that there. So Jim Padden offers, is this intended to just be about food production jurisdiction or other agencies? This is just intended to be about the food side of things, manufactured food specifically, since this is under the manufactured food standards. Jim? All right, let's get to our next comment here. Apologize, every time a new chat comes in, it pushes it down. I can't read it. Kathy offers it might be helpful to provide examples. There we go. Yep. Complaints is one. I mean, it could be, a non-compliance report, just a copy of a regulatory letter. If I received a regulatory letter, within my program for an agency or for a facility I was responsible with, I might reach out to that other agency and make sure that they have the issue covered. Determine whether or not I need to send one of my staff out. Maybe there's a licensing issue I need to follow up on. So again, it doesn't require you to take action, just that you have a procedure for determining whether action should be taken when appropriate. All right, let's see, we've got a lot of comments here, so I'm trying to catch up. Does this have to be a written procedure, or can it be addressed in an MOU? If you have an MOU for sharing and utilizing data between agencies like FDA and yourself, you could certainly probably just point to that and say you'll follow those procedures. I don't see why that would be a problem. We're going to utilize the procedures that are spelled out in the MOU. As long as you've got specific procedures, then it would meet that. All right, Gordon. Okay, getting more comments. I can't stop moving here. Hold on. Gordon says it's a duplicative of the current 5.3.1.2.2. I can pull up 5.3.1.2.2, but I'm going to say right off the top that that's going to be related to outbreaks only, whereas this one is going to be related to everything, general inspections. It could be a complaint. It could just be routine compliance issues. It's going to be far broader than standard 5.
Hey, Pat, it looks like you missed some. Mark Jenkinson. Oh, go ahead.
I'm not surprised because they're every time a new one pops in, it just throws my entire chat screen. So
Mark Jenkinson has said he recommends deleting manufactured food. We also need to share data info with meat inspection, animal feed, and alcohol control, etc.
Okay, thanks, Mark. but this is the manufactured food standard. So I think, if you wanted to do that within your program, and I certainly did that in my program in a lot of areas, I would broaden my procedures. I don't think we can require that, because it's many programs don't have that within their manufactured food program.
And then the second one that you missed was someone asking for examples again. So I think you covered that.
Okay. Then Stephanie's offering, I agree with the question. Would this would this be a change that would what would compliance to the standards look like? So I think what you're asking, Stephanie, is what, how would you comply with this? You would just have to simply have a procedure, or in your existing procedures, you would have to have something about what documentation or information you would share with, we'll just use FDA as an example, just the easy one. But if you have local agencies as well that also do manufactured food work that you share jurisdiction with, what things do you share with them? It can be as simple as identifying, we share consumer complaints, we share copies of non-compliant inspections, or we share copies of our notice of violation for a non-compliant OAI inspection. Whatever you determine your procedures are, that's what they're going to be. And, so you can set that at, kind of bar wherever you want it. It's just asking that you put those procedures in writing so that you have guidance for your staff to follow. So let's see. Kim commented on what was mentioned before, not sure that she agreed on documenting all other programs. These standards are specific to manufactured food. Yeah, I think I said that. Does this require shared database or just written procedures? All this requires is written procedures. State program has written procedures, and we'll probably strike the S there, to share information and utilize data received when applicable. And that's why when applicable is put in. So you decide when it's applicable. So you can just have an evaluation process to determine when it's appropriate to do that. And you can identify in your procedures what regulatory information you're going to share. If you have databases that speak to each other and you're working in the NFSDX, you might put in there that you're going to share non-contract NAI inspection data with FDA. If you don't have that, then you probably wouldn't put that in your procedure. You might just say, hey, we're just going to share our OAI inspection notice of violation with FDA for situational awareness. You decide what you're going to share, and that's what you're going to ultimately put in your procedure. Kim's asking, would there be an expectation that we would need to somehow document that we followed the procedures during an audit? In other words, document that we received the issue, but also that staff follow the procedure. That's an auditor question. I think we have some of the auditors on staff. I'll let them jump in and answer that one. But as the procedure is written, it's just asking you to have a written procedure. It doesn't say anything about implementing it. But, I don't know, do we have an auditor on? Any thoughts with this 9.3.6 language as to whether or not you'd be asking them to demonstrate? I think
Pat, can you guys hear me?
I can hear you, Don.
There goes that double mute. Thank you for
Yep.
letting me unmute myself. So it's an interesting question. I did not submit this issue, but of course, if the standard has a requirement to have a written procedure, there would be the expectation that you are using that written procedure and implementing it. Implementing would be having the written procedure. Conforming is using that. So, I don't know how I would say no. You wouldn't have to show that you were using it. Does that answer your question, Kim?
I think it does. She says yes.
Okay, thanks.
And we've got a couple comments. Bobby, this one might be opening up a can of worms, and looks like we have someone agreeing there. A couple people are agreeing. Stephanie agreeing. It may be broad. Yeah, it's broad. It's intended to be broad so that you can be as restrictive as you want. It doesn't, putting in specific elements, to do this. Remember, the original language was share regulatory information. I'm sorry, that's what we put here. To have written procedures to communicate, collaborate, exchange, and accept data. That was the original language that was proposed. And so that was getting really specific. So you had to have written procedures on when you communicated, how you communicated, and on what, how you were going to collaborate, how you were going to exchange, what you were going to do. So the work group felt that by bringing it down to this language, this gave the state program back the control to set that level of what was being shared and when, and just putting that in their procedure. And then again, with the utilization of data, instead of just having that requirement, is proposed to actually utilize the data received, putting in that when applicable so that you could evaluate that and determine when it was appropriate. So some folks are saying more comfortable if we remove the utilized data received portion. Jurisdiction can do more than the standards. You're not required to just limit yourself there. That's true. Sometimes proposed changes sound like best practices. Oh, jumping again on me. Hold on. Sometimes proposed changes sound like best practice, but remember that we are creating new requirements that we must document. That is true. I agree that this is best practice, but may be difficult to apply and verify. And Steve Morris is asking to be recognized. Yes, Steve, please unmute and give us your comment.
All right, thank you, Pat. One thing, like after reading these comments, I want to remind everyone that these program standards are set up to to be very general, and that will give programs the actual flexibility of actually doing things the way that is best for the program. If we start narrowing down and putting a lot of detail in a lot of these standards, it might become like the actual retail standards that are very descriptive and cannot be modified or be used for the best to the program. So I actually see importing anything that would be a lot more general, that can be explained to an auditor instead of being told what I exactly have to do. So I just wanted to say that.
Thanks, Steve. And agree with Steve. Why not change it to state programs has written procedures for data sharing when applicable? Got a couple of agree with Steve comments. Okay. All right. Made note of those comments. Appreciate that. So again, the idea behind this one was mutual reliance. It's a two-way sharing as we talk about the nationally integrated food safety system. And I'm just giving you some of the preamble that was provided with the reasoning behind why this was proposed by this submitter. As we talk about a nationally integrated food safety system, that's really an element that's really just not been in the standards. Okay. And Jan offers, I think, to meet the intent of mutual reliance, it needs to include the utilize. Another commenter, like Kathy's suggestion above, which we caught. Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and move on in the interest of time here. Thank you for all the input and comments on that one. Definitely one that's a little bit more challenging to think about. Let's go ahead and move on to standard 7, or I'm sorry, standard 7. Let's go ahead and move on to proposal number 7. And this one is another big one. Proposal recommends adding a new program element in standard 9 requiring a corrective action and preventative action plan when non-conformance is identified. The proposal would revise the current corrective action program elements in standard 4 and 6, referencing the new requirements in standard 9. Those are the only two standards that actually have a corrective action requirement. Standard 4, of course, related to your audit non-conformance findings. Standard 6 related to your compliance program non-conformance findings. The proposed change also moves document control into standard 9 for better flow. No rewording there. It was just a take it and move it. The work group agreed with the concept of having this mechanism for corrections of non-conformance or deficiencies identified once a program was in full conformance with the standards. And that's really what is behind this one. The idea is you become fully conformant with the standard, you fall off the horse, one element, becomes, no longer compliant. So does that mean that a state program is no longer in conformance with the standards? Without having some mechanism to document, your improvement, to maintain conformance, it really raises those questions. So the work group felt that rather than developing a separate system to identify and track corrective actions, that corrective actions could be tracked and addressed within the existing strategic improvement plan, with the inclusion of a couple of additional details. Number of state programs that are within the work group advised they were already utilizing the strategic improvement plan to track corrective action issues. So the proposed language was modified by the work group, resulting in new definitions for correction and corrective action, updating language in standard 4 and 6 to incorporate corrective actions into the strategic improvement plan, and updating language in standard 9 to broaden the use of strategic improvement plan to include those corrective actions. As proposed, the document control section was relocated within the standard without any further modifications. All right. Let's go ahead and take a look at that language. All right, so this one's got a few changes here. So to the table of contents of the corrective action plan that was being proposed was removed there. Correction, new definition, action to eliminate a detected nonconformity. Corrective action, defined as action to eliminate the cause of a nonconformity and prevent recurrence. So in standard 4, initiate corrective action, which will be documented on the strategic improvement plan. So that is changed from documenting it, on the form here in 4.3.5. And so the corrective action here has been updated to, again, point to that standard 9, to initiate corrective actions as described in 9.3.2. When the field inspection audits, inspection report audit, or sample report audit meets one or more of those following conditions below. So again, the requirements for meeting that needs improvement are falling below 80%. Nothing has changed there. The only thing is, instead of having to come up with a standalone corrective action plan here, if you had a deficiency, is you would just add it to your strategic improvement plan, so it'd all be in one place. Again, updating there to strike 4.8. Standard 6, modifying that corrective action that's going to be documented on the strategic improvement plan as described in 9.3.2. And then in standard 9, adding in some language here, subsequent self-assessments and FDA assessments are used to track progress. So this is kind of the preamble section here, with maintaining conformance with the program standards or identifying any non-conformance when the program was previously in conformance with the standards. Here's our document control language. It is strike through because it was just moved to the bottom in its entirety, no language changes. So it's identical language, just moved to the bottom. So here's the meat of it. Here's what 9.3.2 says now. So we've added in that the state program fails to meet the program elements and documentation requirements of the standard, and this is whether identified through self-assessment or FDA assessment, the program shall develop or update its written strategic improvement plan that includes the following. So element 1, the individual element or documentation requirement that wasn't met. The improvements, this is for your first time when you're still working to build your program, that stays, or for corrections once you've been in conformance and you fell off the horse. So we're doing that, needed to meet the program element or standard. Our 2 new elements that you would have to document for corrections, the cause of the nonconformance requiring correction when the program was previously in conformance with the individual element or documentation requirement, or the corrective actions taken to prevent future similar nonconformances when the program was previously in conformance with the individual element or documentation requirement of the standard. And then the remainder stay the same for the completion dates, responsible person, and the date completed. So again, this was streamlining it. The proposal was create a separate entire process and documentation, for corrective actions. This was a much more streamlined approach to just use the existing strategic improvement plan, add those 2 additional fields, here in 0.3 and 0.4 to be able to do that. All right, so let's take a look at where we're at here. Okay, so Mark's offering that 0.2 and 0.3 might be in reverse order. That's possible. We could take a look at that. Any other comments on this one? Any other thoughts? So this actually gives, again, you a mechanism in the standards that once you are in conformance and you have an element that all of a sudden falls out of conformance, for you to put that correction in place and just keep track of it to make sure that you stay on track to get it corrected. Okay. Not seeing any other comments there. All right. With that, I'm going to give my voice a short break. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Steve Stitch, and he's going to take you through the Work Group 2 and Work Group 3 proposals, and then I'll pick you back up with the FSMA proposals. So, Steve?
Okay, Pat, thanks. So, yep, here we go. If you can advance to the next one. All right, so here are our Work Group 2 team members. Again, as Pat said, a big thanks to our work group members for their time and expertise. So the first proposal we're going to talk about is proposal 20-004 related to standard 3. And this proposal recommended eliminating element 3.3.7.2.4.4 as it relates to documenting special sampling techniques and making the corresponding change to Appendix 3.1. So the work group members agreed with the submitter that this sampling field is rarely, if ever, utilized, and as such did not need to be required in the standards. So the removal of this element from the standards would not prevent anyone from documenting a special sampling technique should one be utilized. So the work group recommendation was to update standard 3 and appendix 3.1 as proposed. So Pat, if you want to bring up that proposed language.
Yeah, absolutely, do that. Get my cursor back over in the right spot here.
Okay, so this one's pretty simple. Here is our subsection 3.3.7.2.4.4. Special sampling techniques if used to collect the sample being struck from the standards. So, and also in Appendix 3.1, also stricken from the appendix, and any special sampling techniques used, and a correction above, adding the and to read properly. So I'll give a moment for any comments.
Go ahead and drop your comments into chat if you got any comments or want to be recognized. Got a comment from Gina, good change. All right, doesn't look like we have too many other comments, Steve, so we'll go ahead and bring you back to the PowerPoint here. On to 6.
So our next proposal is 20-006 related to standard 4. And this proposal recommends one, consider categorizing inspection report audits by type within Appendix 4.3. In other words, the performance rating for inspection report audits spreadsheet, where we have sections for inspections related to GMP, secret acid, preventive controls, etc. So to categorize these inspection reports for comparison, and calculate the ratings horizontally and vertically by inspection type as a whole. And 2, in the top portion of the Appendix 4.6 inspection report audit form, add preventive controls as an option under type of inspection. So the work group felt the tracking described for 4.3 might be useful for internal as an internal tool for assessing individual inspection types. However, it's not a requirement of the standards, and not all states conduct all types of advanced inspections, and in some cases, maybe don't conduct any advanced inspections at all. So the work group suggests that states already have the ability to establish the tracking of individual inspection types on their own by using a separate page for each type of inspection, and then totaling the data from all the entries to calculate overall conformance rates. Section 4.3.3.3 provides that performance is documented on Appendix 4.6 and 4.3 or equivalent forms. So a program wishing to track their data in this format could develop an equivalent form to do so. The work group does support the proposed change to Appendix 4.6, the inspection report audit form, to add preventive controls as an option under type of inspection. So the work group recommendation is to update Appendix 4.6 only, and no modifications to Appendix 4.3. So Pat, I think we probably just want to look at Appendix 4.3.
4.6.
I'm sorry, 4.6. I read the end number instead of the earlier one. So you can see here we've just added a box for preventive controls under types of, or type of inspection. So pretty simple change here. So any comments or suggestions or questions, you can put them in the chat box. We'll give a moment here for that. Not seeing any activity there, Pat.
All right, we'll go ahead and move on.
Okay. And this would be proposal 20001 related to definitions. And this proposal recommended updating the definition of consumer complaint to read complaints made by the public regarding food products, facility practices, labeling, and any other related activities under the jurisdiction of the agency. So standard 3, section 3.3.5 requires programs to establish requirements for receiving, tracking, evaluating, responding to, and closing consumer complaints. The broader existing definition, which did not limit it to complaints under the agency's jurisdiction, was being interpreted that programs might have to follow up with those complaints that were referred to other agencies to actually track and close the complaint. So the work group was concerned that removing the responsibility of recording the receipt and referral of food-related complaints outside the agency's jurisdiction may result in complaints being lost. So there was some discussion regarding the definition, or honestly, mostly the extent of the term tracking. So based on discussion with several states and key FDA personnel, it does not appear that this is a widespread concern. Programs are logging complaints they receive that are outside their jurisdiction and documenting the referral to the appropriate agency, which then closes the complaint out of their records. This has always been the intent, therefore no changes are recommended at this time. So the work recommendation is no modification to the standards.
So we don't have any proposed changes that are going to be recommended, so we don't have any language to show you on this particular one. Anyone have any comments on this one? So they're proposing to leave the definition as it stands. I'm not seeing any comments there, Steve. We did get a couple of comments as we started talking about this one on the last proposal related to making the preventive controls checkbox on the report audit form. Had someone ask, is FDA conducting these audits? Who's conducting PC audits? Are any states in phase 2 conducting these audits? And what were the criteria to audit B for PC? Okay, so the audit question is is related to the report. Was the report complete and done? We put elements into the standards for preventive controls last year. We put recommendations in. Those changes will be potentially incorporated by FDA during the next change to the standards. This was an oversight and not adding this to the form last year, because if you are doing PC inspections, you have inspectional procedures that are required that are going to be in standard 3 and in 3.1. We added audit questions to the field inspection audit form, which means at some point down the road, we're going to be doing field inspection audits. So it's not about today, it's about putting these in the standard in the future. If you're not doing PC inspections, then you're never going to be doing a PC audit of a report of an inspection. But if you are, then that's something that for that report audit, because the change we made was to the report audit form, not to anything else this time. All those other changes related to PC were made last year. So for this one, again, this is going to be, if it's done, this change will go in the future, probably not till 2022. I don't know whether people are doing them now or not. We do have PC inspections that are being done. So presumably at some point, somebody's going to be evaluating those, because they are complex inspections and you're supposed to pick some of the more complex inspections to audit. So you'll have to be going through the report to make sure that they've done their effective documentation per your report procedures, and make sure that they've done all those things. So that's what that change was specifically about. It's just giving you that checkbox to check to say, hey, this was a PC focused inspection, just as we had checkboxes for, I think, seafood HACCP and juice and other things. Hopefully that answers those questions. Any other questions related to the consumer complaint definition? All right, Steve, looks like we're on to 20008.
Okay, so this proposal, 20008, is related to Standard 4. And this proposal recommended adding a new question to Appendix 4.6 report audit form to cover the elements of the FDA Form 585 quality factor checklist, which is required for state contract reports submitted to FDA. So the work group felt that the addition of the quality factor checklist was specific only to contract inspections under the contract inspection statement of work, and should not be included in the standards, since it would not be applicable to state inspection reports being audited. So the work group also felt that the addition of the quality factor checklist question to Appendix 4.6 did not appear to eliminate the requirement to complete an FDA Form 585, which was part of the reason for the submission, for each contract inspection report, since the quality factor checklist question in Appendix 4.6 would not specifically answer each of the individual Form 585 questions. So the work group recommended no modification to the standards or Appendix 4.6. So previous proposal, since there's no proposed language, we can go right to the chat in case anybody has any comments, questions, or suggestions on this particular proposal.
All right, not seeing anything there, Steve. We'll go ahead and move on to the next one here, 2014.
Okay. So proposal 20014 is related to Standard 4 also. And this proposal recommended establishing new requirements for qualified auditors in Standard 4. So the proposal recommended adding section 4.3.1.5 to Standard 4, which would require training and verifying the qualified field inspection auditors as described in section 4.3.6. A second change would include the addition of a new section, 4.3.6, that outlines the requirements for verification of qualified auditors including frequency of verification and documentation. And there was a suggestion for a footnote referencing FMD 76. The work group felt the proposal was unclear and lacked specificity. The work group discussed the existing definition of qualified field inspection auditor and felt that the existing definition provided sufficient guidance and flexibility for states to select qualified staff to conduct field inspection audits. The work group felt it was unnecessary to try to align requirements for field inspection audits, or auditors, with those in FMD 76, as contract inspections and their audits only represent a fraction of the work completed by states. So creating new requirements for verification of auditors would be a substantial new ongoing workload for state programs, as many are not yet conducting Tier 3 contract inspection audits, and many more are not currently doing specialized inspections under contract. Since many programs do not have sufficient workload in specialized food areas to maintain multiple staff and qualified auditors over each specified inspection area, this would also create a new dependency on the FDA division to provide support to conduct periodic verification audits of state personnel. So the work group recommendation on this one, again, was no modifications to the standards. So there is no proposed language. So any questions or comments on this one? You can drop them in chat. And, we'll give it a couple moments here for folks to think about that.
Okay, not seeing anything coming in. We're ready to move on to work group 3 proposals.
Okay, so here are work group 3 participants and team members. Again, a big thank you to everyone who contributed. And on to the next slide, Pat. Yep. So we just have 2 proposals here to cover. The first is proposal 20-015 related to standard 5. And this proposal recommended incorporating requirements to use the incident command system structure or develop a response plan, which included 4 elements. First, identifying and executing investigational objectives. Number 2, managing communications. 3, implementing control measures. And 4, conducting post-response activities for all investigations covered under Standard 5. So the work group was concerned that the original proposal was overly prescriptive and that ICS structure or a response action plan might be required for all food-related incidents regardless of their size or impact on the program. The group did support the intent of the proposal and modified the language to more clearly allow states to identify how and when they would use incident command system, a response action plan, or a similar process. The work group also changed the placement of the new language within the standard to be located under the state's procedural requirements in section 5.3.1.2, so states could determine their own policy related to implementation of these requirements. So the work group recommended approving the proposal as modified by the work group. So Pat, if you could pull that up. So now we can see the new language under 5.3.1.2.7 describes how and when the program manages food-related incidents using incident command system a response action plan, or other similar processes that include those four elements we described earlier. Identifying and executing investigation objectives, managing communications, implementing control measures, and conducting post-response activities.
So Steve, I'll point out, as we have highlighted here, this would just go in with your written procedures. So this is just, all of your other written procedures in this section. This just becomes that one element of your written procedures. And many of you that have, RRTs probably already have some of these things in your procedures. So open up for comments.
Yep.
Anyone have any comments? Want to be recognized? Okay. There we go. Yep. Good proposal. All right. Guess we'll go on to our next one here.
Okay, and the last proposal for work group 3 is proposal 20005. That's related to standard 5 also. And this proposal recommended adding a new requirement to standard 5 to require programs to identify a point of contact to receive reportable food registry notification from FDA or RFRs. Recent review found that a high percentage of the contacts were no longer valid and had not been updated by the states. So while the work group appreciated this issue being brought forward, they are encouraging the MFRPA board to facilitate outreach to states to encourage agencies to voluntarily include RFR contacts as part of their 5.3.1.2.2 procedure, which requires describing agency collaboration as necessary with FDA and other appropriate local, state, and federal authorities in multi-jurisdictional food-related incidents. So the work group also felt that it was FDA's responsibility to update the RFR contact list, similar to the state's responsibility to update their own contact list as described in 5.3.1.2.6. The work group further suggests that FDA may be able to increase awareness through the development of a job aid. So the work group recommendation on this one was no modifications to the standards. So there is no proposed language on this one, so we can take a look at the chat, Pat, and see if anybody has any suggestions, questions, or comments.
Yeah, go ahead and drop your comments in chat. I do see we have a comment from our last one, which we'll come back to in just a minute.
Yep.
Any comments related to the reportable food registry notification? So again, no change to the standard recommended. Okay, not seeing any comments coming in on our prior proposal here, which was 15, related to the use of ICS. Lisa asked, do we have to define what our triggers would be? And yes, the language that we proposed, that the work group, I should say, proposed, lets you describe how and when you manage them using these principles or using these response action plan or these systems. The proposed language was much broader, in terms of requiring you to use them in every food-related incident, which of course, some of these incidents are not, they're, one person response for a couple of hours. They're not huge managed, events. So this again allows you as the state to set this up and incorporate this into your procedures. Good question. And from Rick, FDA RRT is capturing updated information for RFR contacts. That's excellent. So they'll be capturing that for many of the RRT states, and they may be outreaching beyond that. AFTO can certainly help FDA if this is an issue And I think what they found is there was some studies done and found that a good percentage of the initial RFR contacts that FDA had were no longer effective, and that's really what led to this proposal being submitted. They were, people that had moved on, promoted, retired, and nobody had ever updated the contacts for those agencies. So those agencies ultimately just, I guess, weren't getting RFR notifications anymore. So it is important, something you can incorporate into your procedures, but I think the work group felt it wasn't something that needed to be put into the standards, that FDA could do an annual outreach or ask AFTA to outreach through the board, the MFRPS Alliance board or something to capture that information for folks, that you didn't have to actually go in and change procedures and make it a procedural issue. I just felt there was other mechanisms for doing that. Okay.
Okay, Pat, thank you. That's a wrap for work group 3.
All right, thanks, Steve. All right, well, let's go ahead and move on to our FSMA work group. We got 4 left. Marathon going here. Really appreciate you guys hanging in. We'll move through these. These are fairly straightforward. These very much match what we did with the preventive controls changes last year that were voted and sent on to FDA. The work group was asked to continue that effort and take a look at sanitary transportation and intentional adulteration rules. And as you'll notice as we get into this, the vast majority of the intentional adulteration rule, of course, revolves around that food defense plan. So you'll see some of that language as we move through these 4 proposals. Changes to standards 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we'll take each one as we go and talk about it. So our FSMA work group that took a look at this issue and came up with these recommendations for you all to take a look at and consider. So thank you for your service and your efforts. We very much appreciate that. 2019, this is our standard 1 proposal. Recommended adding the mitigation strategies to protect food from intentional adulteration rule to which is found in 21 CFR Part 121. Add that to Appendix 1.2. It does not currently exist in Appendix 1.2. As you recall, Appendix 1.2 is our catalog of state authorities in relation to FDA authorities. So this would add that FDA authority in there and allow states to determine whether or not they adopt it or not adopt it, and can make that appropriate. So this would be an additional 1-line entry for folks on Appendix 1.2 to capture that potential adulteration, intentional adulteration. Sanitary transportation already exists in Subpart 1, 21 CFR Part 1, Subpart O, and we saw that earlier when we took a look at that. So let's take a look at the language here. Language change for Appendix 1.2. This again is our cataloging standard here. So we're going to go down to 121, which is what we'll add this in. That's the change. No other change proposed for standard 1 related to these. As you'll note here, Section 1, Subpart O, here in 21 CFR Part 1, this is the sanitary transportation regulations that already existed. And as you saw above from one of the prior proposals, they recommended putting that caption here so that it is very clear that that's what it is for. So that will be voted on as well. So any questions or comments on this one, and drop it into chat or ask to be recognized. Pretty straightforward. Okay. Not seeing any comments or questions. Go ahead and, moving way too fast with that scroller bar. Let's go ahead and move on to proposal 20020, number 20. So this one is again in relation to standard 2. Work group proposed updating the food defense training reference in standard 2 at 2.3.2.2.10. This is under the basic training curriculum. And by striking the words awareness training from the subsection to make the reference to food defense training more broad, an identical edit was made to Appendix 2.3, which is the inspector's training record. There was some significant discussion about whether sanitary transportation was a basic training or an advanced training. The work group ultimately agreed that it should fall under the basic training, would be categorized under prevailing statutes, regulations, and ordinances. As such, the work group added that sanitary transportation of human food and animal food course, the FD 9001W, as again under that recommended training curriculum in Appendix 2.4. They also updated the food defense training section in Appendix 2.4, which is again that a recommendation of curriculum to add some of the current food defense courses and intentional adulteration review courses that are out there. So let's go ahead and pop over to that, let you see what that looks like. So here's our standard 2. So again, the only change here is under the course curriculum for basic training is just to strike awareness training. So it just reads food defense. Broadens that out a little bit. Same change here. This is your training inspector record, inspector training record. Let's get the words correct here. Under Appendix 2.3, again, just striking awareness training. No other changes. Keeping it broad, so it covers all different types of food defense training that you may send staff to, not just awareness training, since that's now broadened since this was originally created. Here in 2.3, our training record, that's just continuing, so no other changes there. And then 2.4, again, adding that sanitary transportation of human and animal food online course that FDA offers. And again, this is your example, your best practice list for you to consider. And one of the other proposals, as you recall, suggested moving this out as a guidance document so it wouldn't be under the standards. All right. And then also here under the food defense courses, adding in as potential options for consideration, some of the additional courses that are available. The course that FDA offers online, as well as a couple of FSPCA courses. Again, you're going to put into your training program what's appropriate for you based on your authority and what you adopt. So this is what's being proposed by the work group. All right, so let's see, Kathy's offering, and anyone else has comments, please put them in chat. Kathy's offering FSPCA courses. Will they always be available through FSPCA with no hoops, no registration requirements, fees? We have no idea. And again, this is just guidance. If you don't have it in your training plan that you're not required to take them, then that's fine. These are what's out there and what's available currently. The FSPCA intentional adulteration rule overview is being added to the curriculum, but FSPCA does not offer a certificate upon completion. What's the expectation for documentation? It would be just like any other course that you take where you don't get a certificate. You'd have to document a registration or some other means of being able to get access to the course and take the course. So course roster or whatever you utilize. Doesn't have to be a certificate. It can always be some other means of documentation. So good questions there, Kathy. Any other questions or comments on these proposed changes for the training standard 2 and appendices? Okay, not seeing anything else pop in there. Go ahead and go back here and we'll take a look at our proposal number 21 related to standard 3. So just got 2 left, this one and the next one here. So this one, the work group proposed updating the inspection procedures in standard 3 by adding 2 new elements, one related to sanitary transportation and a second related to food defense and intentional adulteration requirements. The new subsections were added to section 3.3.2 as follows. .18, when appropriate, assess the sanitary transportation of human food requirements that apply to transportation operations. And .19, when appropriate, review the firm's food defense plan, including mitigation strategies, monitoring, corrective action, and verification activities. Similar elements were added to Appendix 3.1 and simply rephrased into a question format. Let's go ahead and pull those up so you can take a look at what those look like. Again, these mirror the changes that were approved last year for preventive controls. So you're going to see here, and again, this is our section for inspection procedures. State program is a written procedure for inspecting food plants that require inspectors to. And so again, we're adding in our .18, when appropriate, assess sanitary transportation of human food requirements that apply to transportation operations. And when appropriate, review the firm's food defense plan, including mitigation strategies, monitoring, corrective action, and verification activities. When appropriate is here as it is for the language we put in for PC last year, because you may not adopt this, may not be applicable to a particular firm that you're inspecting. So you would just have those procedures based on your authority and based on the jurisdiction that the facility falls under and has to require or has to comply with those requirements. And again, under 3.1, the only changes is just putting those 2 elements in as questions so that you can say yes, no, and explain why, and then renumbering the rest of that section. So with that, I'll stop and you got a question or comment or would like to be recognized, please drop that into chat. All right, not seeing anything coming in. We'll go ahead and go back and take a look at our last one here, proposal number 22, and this one's related to standard 4. So the work group proposed updating Appendix 4.5, the field inspection audit form, to incorporate 2 new questions, one related to sanitary transportation and one related to food defense. Additional edits were recommended for the instructions on the form to identify these sanitary transportation and food defense elements as only being required when applicable to the firm's operation. Appendix 4.2, which is your performance rating for field inspection audits, was also modified to create 2 new lines to accommodate the audit ratings for the sanitary transportation and food defense questions that were added to Appendix 4.5. So let's take a look at that so you can see what that looks like here. All right, so here's our field inspection audit form. You see we just made some conforming changes here. All questions must be answered except for where needs improvement except for, and we've added in those transportation questions and those food defense plan reviews. Those are only required, if they're applicable. Otherwise, leave them blank. I'll leave the scoring for the questions blank and check not applicable. Let's take a look at the questions that were added. And again, very similar format to what we did with preventive controls. These were just rolled up into 2 sections. Did the inspector conduct an assessment of sanitary transportation practices applicable to transportation operators? We've got our check boxes in our comment section there. And then the next section related to, again, our food defense plan reviews. Did the inspector conduct an assessment of the food defense plan, including review of mitigation strategies, monitoring, corrective action, and verification activities? Got our check boxes and comments. And then our change for Appendix 4.2 is just adding those 2 new questions, adding 2 new lines in so that you can put the ratings down for those. So with that, I will pause. And if you got questions or comments or would like to be recognized, please drop that in the chat. Okay. Not seeing any comments there. Go ahead and head back over here. So we'll go ahead and start winding things down here. So this presentation and discussion of the proposals during the webinar are intended to give everyone that opportunity to view the proposals and have any open discussions, ask questions. Work groups can reevaluate the language of certain proposals if additional consideration is warranted. So we'll certainly got those comments that were put in, and we'll come back and talk with the work groups. All right, so we do have some comments that popped in here finally, so let me come back to those. Back that up one here. All right, Kathy asks, let's see, I don't know, that was too far. Justin asks, will Appendix 4.2 worksheets be modified to meet the new audit form? Yes, that's what we did. Back up again. So we have the updated audit form here with these 2 new questions under section IV1 and V1. And if you go to 4.2, we've added IV1 and V1 here so that you can capture those ratings on the Appendix 4.2. Thanks, Justin. Appreciate that.
I guess I have a question though, because if you go, can you scroll down on 4.2?
Yep.
You have section 1, 2, 3, 4 now. So is 4 is for the additions, but there's a 4 that's already missing on that section based off of the new audit form for field inspection audits for the PC part of it.
Yeah, but that hasn't been adopted into the standards yet. So again, we have to go with the existing languages in the standards. So you're correct. What we proposed during the prior revisions was to add a section 4 related to the preventive controls. So if that is accepted, then these would just simply be renumbered section 5 and section 6, and then you would have those additional questions that would be added in here. But again, we have to take what's currently approved in the standards that's out on the streets. Those others are still in a proposal format with FDA. Yes, those you're correct. Those would be added in here, and then these would be bumped down and up one number to correspond and match if those are all accepted. But we have to assume that those aren't accepted and that these are the only proposal. It's a standalone proposal that it's going and submitted that way. That makes sense?
So it's extremely confusing.
Okay. Well, when we vote on standards as a body, that goes to FDA as a recommendation. Okay. FDA does not update the standards every year because of the OMB process, right? It's a 3-year cycle. And they have to go through. It has to be published in the Federal Register. So the changes that we recommended last year related to preventive controls are still just recommendations. They are not adopted in the standards. If you go out to the FDA website and you pull up the standards, you're not going to find them on the forms. You're still going to find Appendix 4.5 ending right here with this question 6. And because of that, because each of these proposals stand as their own and FDA can accept them or not accept them, we have to start with what's actually approved in the standards. We don't start with we don't build a proposal on top of a proposal on top of a proposal because some of those proposals may not be accepted because it's up to FDA ultimately to accept them or not accept them. So this took what is existing Appendix 4.5 currently today in the standard, or 3 months ago when we did this, and it just added those new sections to it. Again, all that's going to be required if they choose to accept these and the PC ones is there'll be slight renumbering of these to bring that into play. Okay. Anything else on that one?
Well, I guess I'm just confused because I have an audit form that has the proposed changes that was sent to me from FDA. So now I'm confused on which audit form I'm supposed to be using. And I guess my question's already been answered. I'll just be quiet.
Well, no, I think I understand what you're asking. The form you were sent by FDA is for your FDA contract audit, correct?
Correct.
Right. So FDA can make changes to their contract audit form. We try to keep this form aligned as best we can with the contract audit form. So the changes that we made last year in our proposal are the same ones that FDA is currently using this year in their contract audit form. They can change their contract audit form every year. They can change it multiple times a year because it doesn't have to go through the OMB process. This one, because it's actually in the standards, okay, doesn't get changed every year. So those proposals didn't get put into that. So the one you were sent was part of that contract inspection requirement. You have to do that for anything where if you're doing a PC level inspection, you have to use that form for that. The audit staff recognize that there are 2 different versions currently, and they're only going to audit you to the appropriate level. So if you're doing a state, simple GMP, basic GMP inspection that doesn't go into PC, PC readiness or anything, you can use Appendix 4.5, or you can use the other contract form and just not fill out those sections. Again, all the rest of the material is the same either way. FDA went forward with it because their contract inspections for doing some PC work is already in the current year contract. So they couldn't wait on that field audit form for MFRPS to catch up, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Pat.
Okay. Good questions, good clarification, because I'm sure others had that same question. All right. Let's come back to our PowerPoint here. All right, so we talked about our public input. So voting process. So voting will take place after the meeting. So normally, we do this during the annual meeting. This year is a little different, as is everything with COVID. I realize this is probably not the optimal way for us to be able to do and share this. So, if you do have any feedback or ideas on how we could improve this process that we're doing today, please shoot me an email outside the meeting. Because we're up for suggestions as to how we can improve this and get this information out. The goal here is to get this information out to you, be able to share the materials well in advance of when we're going to be voting. So again, if you've got input or feedback, we can get back with the work group, see if there's any little last minute kind of fine tuning of the language, and then get that language that's going to be voted on out to the voting members well in advance of voting. When we do this at the meeting, we present these on a Monday. We're making modifications in some cases to a few of the proposals Monday night. And then it's a challenge for the program managers that are voting on this, because then it's put before them and they're asked to vote on it, and we're going over the changes, kind of live on the spot, and they really don't have a whole lot of time to digest it. So this is intended not only to deal with our COVID-19 situation this year, but also to put a little bit more time in the process so that we can make sure that there are additional modifications or changes, that the voting members have those well in advance of the voting date, and that you'll be able to actually spend some time taking a look at them and considering them before we come together to vote on them. So this is that first step of just getting it out there for that public comment. Voting we're going to be setting it up probably for the latter part of February, maybe early March. It just depends on the changes and timing. We have in 2 weeks our big MFRPS annual meeting. So AFTO and FDA are both very, very heavily involved in getting that together and ready for you. So we really aren't going to have a whole lot of time to devote to the change proposals until we get that completed. I will tell you, I've learned that the virtual meetings are actually a lot more work than face-to-face meetings. You got a lot of extra steps involved in setting up websites and doing recordings and things. So we're definitely, got a lot of time to take care of that. But we will certainly get to that. We'll present these opportunities again. Will be provided for the voting managers before they're voted on. We don't allow modifications, to the standard language at that time. So it's ultimately you either accept it or reject it. We have put a requirement, or not a requirement, but an allowance in that minor editorial changes, punctuation, grammar that don't change the intent of the proposal is allowed. For proposals to be approved and still have that made. We found some errors last year with grammar and commas and whatnot. So rather than just note all that, we can actually go ahead and make those changes. But that'll be part of that voting process. So again, once the proposals are voted on, if they're accepted by a majority vote, they'll be compiled and transmitted to FDA. As I just mentioned a few minutes ago, the FDA is certainly not obligated to accept every request for modification that comes from the MFRPA, but I think in the past they've done a really good job of accepting the vast majority of language as submitted. But they'll evaluate the merits of each recommendation and then make any changes to their administrative processes, which includes publishing notice in the Federal Register. We anticipate this is likely going to happen. These will not be going into effect until most likely 2022. Because our last version was approved in 2019, so the next 3-year cycle would be 2022. So FDA will be compiling information and working on doing everything they need to do through the latter part of this year and into early next year. So you have plenty of time. Don't think these are going to be all of a sudden you got to turn around and do these at the drop of a dime. You got a lot of time between now and then of course we will be discussing with FDA implementation time period to allow sufficient time once the new requirements are in place for programs to go ahead and update their procedures based on, again, we'll look at each one and see about how long it should take someone to make those updated changes. And we appreciate you participating in the informational webinar. We do have a question about has the day for voting been identified? And no, it hasn't. We'll ultimately have to get that scheduled. It will be latter February or early March. But we'll try to get that out at least 3 weeks notice so that you have plenty of time. And our goal is to provide you with the finalized language that you'll be looking at least 2 weeks prior. Jan mentioned I should remind everyone about who will be voting on these. Each program gets one vote. There is a voting manager, and per the bylaws, it does have to be a manager that votes on these. You cannot delegate this to a non-manager coordinator. You can delegate it to another manager that has that overall responsibility for your manufactured food program, but it does need to be a manager within each program that will come to the session to vote on these. And again, each program gets one vote, for or against them. So, and it's a majority vote to send them forward or to kill the proposal, for lack of a better term. Any other questions? Again, thank you everybody for participating. We will get this posted up on the MFRPS portal probably by the end of the week once we get all the recordings and everything available. And so we'll send that link out and you can go and listen to the recording. All of the proposals are already there. So if you go to the MFRPS portal Once you log into the portal, that top left corner, you click on that index of shared documents. It takes you over there and you will actually see a button that's there in the top for the 2020, 2021 change proposals. You can click on that. You can actually read the proposals as submitted by the submitter, as well as the proposal recommendations coming out from the work groups. So all that information's there, and then we will be compiling all the changes for you as well as we get a little bit closer, and you'll be able to find that information there on that index of shared documents. All right. Okay, well, with that, I appreciate it. My voice held out. Thanks, everybody, for joining. If you have any specific questions, feel free to just shoot me an email at pkennelly@afdo.org, and I'll be happy to try and answer any questions that you have. That, we'll wish you a good week, and we will certainly see you hopefully within 2 weeks at the meeting. So looking forward to seeing everybody. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Pat.